I never believed in Bigfoot until the day one found me tied to a tree in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest and saved my life in the most unexpected way. And what happened in the hours that followed taught me that intelligence and compassion aren't limited to humans. Let me tell you this story from the beginning because even now, 32 years later, I still have trouble believing it happened. My name is Richard Dalton, and in 1993, I was 42 years old, working as a ranger for the U.S. Forest Service in Washington State. I'd been with the Forest Service for 16 years by that point, starting right after I got out of the Army in 1977. It was a good life. I spent my days in some of the most beautiful wilderness in America, helping visitors, monitoring wildlife, maintaining trails, and occasionally dealing with people who got themselves into trouble in the backcountry. I lived in a small cabin near the town of Trout Lake, Washington, population about 500, nestled in the shadow of Mount Adams. The cabin came with my position, modest but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms, a wood-burning stove, and a porch that offered spectacular views of the surrounding forest. I'd been married once back in my late 20s, but Julie and I had divorced in 1987 after she decided she couldn't handle the isolation of forest life. Our son, Nathan, was 15 in 1993, living with his mother in Vancouver, Washington. I saw him during school breaks and some weekends, though the 3-hour drive made regular visits challenging. The summer of 1993 was exceptionally hot and dry. I remember it clearly because we were on high alert for forest fires. The conditions were perfect for a catastrophic blaze, and every ranger in the Gifford-Pinchot was working overtime to monitor campfires, check permits, and educate the public about fire safety. The news that summer was dominated by the Great Flood in the Midwest, with the Mississippi River causing devastation across multiple states. Meanwhile, we in the Pacific Northwest were dealing with drought conditions and temperatures regularly hitting the mid-90s. I drove a 1990 Chevy Blazer Forest Service green with the official U.S. Forest Service logo on the doors. It was equipped with a CB radio, first aid kit, emergency supplies, and everything I needed for backcountry patrols. I also carried a Motorola handheld radio for communication with our main station, though reception was spotty in the mountainous terrain. The morning of August 19, 1993, a Thursday, started like any other summer workday. I left my cabin at 6 a.m. heading north on Forest Road 23 to check on some popular camping areas near the Indian Heaven Wilderness. The radio was playing. I remember hearing "Whoomp, There It Is" by Tag Team, which was huge that summer, followed by Garth Brooks's "Ain't Going Down Till the Sun Comes Up." The morning air was already warm, promising another scorching day. Around 8:30 a.m., I stopped at a trailhead where I'd received reports of illegal camping. People had apparently been staying beyond the 14-day limit and had built unauthorized fire rings. My job was to check it out, document any violations, and either issue warnings or citations, depending on what I found. I parked the Blazer and grabbed my gear, clipboard, camera for documentation, my handheld radio. The trailhead was empty except for one beat-up 1985 Toyota pickup truck with California plates. I made a note of the license number and headed up the trail. The hike to the camping area was about 2 miles, climbing steadily through beautiful old-growth forest, Douglas fir, western hemlock, and cedar trees that had been growing for centuries. I'd walked this trail hundreds of times over the years and knew every switchback and landmark. When I reached the camping area, I found it occupied but abandoned at the moment. There were 2 tents set up, multiple fire rings that violated regulations, trash scattered around, and clear signs that people had been there for weeks rather than days. But no one was present. They'd probably gone hiking or were down at the nearby lake. I began documenting the violations with my camera, taking photos of the unauthorized fire rings, the improper food storage that would attract bears, and the general mess. I was planning to wait for the campers to return so I could issue citations and explain proper camping procedures. That's when I heard voices approaching, 2 men, from the sound of it, talking loudly and laughing. They came into view a moment later, both in their mid-30s, wearing dirty clothes, carrying fishing poles. They stopped when they saw me standing in their camp in my ranger uniform. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone friendly but professional. "I'm Ranger Dalton with the Forest Service. I need to talk to you about some violations here." The taller of the 2 men, thin with long hair and a scraggly beard, immediately became defensive. "We're not doing anything wrong. We have a right to camp here." "You do, but there are regulations," I explained, pulling out my citation book. "You've exceeded the 14-day camping limit. You've built unauthorized fire rings, and your food isn't properly stored. I'm going to have to issue citations and ask you to break camp today." "Like hell you will," the other man said. He was shorter, stockier, with a red baseball cap and an aggressive stance. "We're not paying any fines, and we're not leaving." I'd dealt with confrontational campers before. Usually staying calm and explaining the rules clearly was enough to defuse the situation. "I understand you're frustrated, but these regulations exist for everyone's safety and to protect the forest. The fire danger right now is extreme, and—" "I don't care about your regulations," the tall man interrupted. He stepped closer, and I saw something in his eyes that made me nervous, a wild, unpredictable quality. "You're going to turn around and walk back down that trail, and you're going to forget you ever saw us." "I can't do that," I said, my hand moving instinctively toward my radio. "I'm required to—" The shorter man moved fast, grabbing my wrist before I could key the radio. "No, you don't!" What happened next was a blur. There was a brief struggle. I tried to pull away, tried to call for help, but the 2 men were younger and stronger. The tall one grabbed my radio and smashed it against a rock. They pushed me backward, and I stumbled over a log, falling hard. Before I could get up, they were on me, pinning my arms. I felt rope. They must have had it in their camp, being wrapped around my wrists. "What are you doing?" I shouted. "This is assault on a federal officer. You're making this so much worse for yourselves." "Shut up," the shorter man growled, pulling the rope tighter. They dragged me to a large Douglas fir tree at the edge of the clearing and began tying me to it. I struggled, but with both of them working together and my hands already bound, I couldn't break free. They wrapped rope around my chest, securing me to the tree trunk, then tied my legs together. "Listen to me," I said, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear rising in my chest. "People know where I am. When I don't check in, they'll send someone looking for me. You need to stop this now before—" The tall man stuffed a bandana into my mouth, tying it behind my head. "We need time to pack up and get out of here," he said, checking the knots one more time. "By the time someone finds you, we'll be long gone." And hey, at least we didn't hurt you, right? That should count for something. "This is crazy," the shorter man said, looking nervous now that the adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off. "We're just making this worse. Maybe we should get our stuff and go," the tall man interrupted. "Now, before anyone else shows up." They began frantically packing their camp, shoving gear into backpacks, kicking dirt over the fire rings. The whole process took maybe 20 minutes, and then they were gone, disappearing down the trail and leaving me tied to the tree, unable to move or call for help. I struggled against the ropes, trying to work my hands free, but they'd done a thorough job. The bandana in my mouth made breathing difficult, and panic started to set in. I forced myself to calm down, to think rationally. Susan, the dispatcher at the main ranger station, would expect me to check in within a few hours. When I didn't, she'd send someone to look for me. My blazer was parked at the trailhead. They'd find it and follow the trail up here. I just had to wait. I'd be uncomfortable, maybe dehydrated by the time help arrived, but I'd be okay. The morning wore on, and the temperature climbed. By what I estimated was around 11 a.m., the sun had shifted position and was now shining directly on my face and upper body. Sweat soaked my uniform shirt. The rope seemed to tighten as I perspired, cutting into my skin. My mouth was painfully dry, made worse by the bandana that prevented me from swallowing properly. I heard a helicopter at one point, probably doing fire surveillance, but it was too far away to spot me through the thick forest canopy. Birds continued their normal activities. Steller's jays called from the trees. A woodpecker hammered somewhere nearby. The forest didn't care that I was in trouble. Around what I guessed was early afternoon, I heard something moving through the forest. My first thought was bear. They were common in this area, and an encounter while I was helpless and tied to a tree was terrifying to contemplate. I tried to make noise through the gag, hoping to scare it away, but only managed muffled sounds. The footsteps came closer, heavy and deliberate. Branches snapped, and then I saw it emerge from the tree line into the clearing. It wasn't a bear. The creature stood at least 7 feet tall, maybe closer to 7.5 feet. It was covered in dark reddish-brown hair that hung in long, shaggy strands over its entire body. The shoulders were massively broad, the arms incredibly long and muscular. It walked upright on 2 legs with a slight forward lean, moving with surprising grace for something so large. My first instinct was to freeze, to not draw attention to myself, but I was tied to a tree and couldn't exactly hide. The creature had already seen me. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, perhaps 30 feet away, and studied me with obvious curiosity. The face was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not quite human, not quite ape. It had a pronounced brow ridge, a flat, broad nose, high cheekbones, and a heavy jaw. But the eyes were what shocked me. They were dark brown, intelligent, and unmistakably aware. This was Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the creature that supposedly didn't exist, and it was standing right in front of me, as real as the tree I was tied to. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then the creature took a step forward, then another, approaching slowly and cautiously. I tried to remain still, to not appear threatening, though my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The creature stopped about 10 feet away, tilting its massive head as it examined me. Its gaze moved from my face to the ropes binding me to the tree, then back to my face. I could see it thinking, processing, trying to understand the situation. Then it made a sound, a low questioning vocalization that resonated in my chest. It wasn't aggressive or threatening. If anything, it sounded curious, maybe even concerned. I tried to respond, but the gag made it impossible to do anything but make muffled noises. The creature's eyes focused on the bandana tied around my head, and I saw recognition in its expression. It understood that I was restrained, that something was preventing me from speaking. The creature took another step closer, now just 6 feet away. This close, I could see details: the coarse texture of its hair, the thick calluses on its palms, the way its chest rose and fell with breathing. It smelled musky, like wet earth and cedar bark, but not unpleasant. It reached out one massive hand toward my face, and every muscle in my body tensed, but the touch when it came was surprisingly gentle. Thick fingers touched the bandana, exploring it, trying to understand how it was tied. The creature made another vocalization, this one softer, almost soothing. Then, with careful deliberation, it began working at the knot behind my head. The fingers were thick but surprisingly dexterous, and after a few moments of fumbling, the bandana came loose. I spit out the cloth and gasped, sucking in deep breaths of air. "Thank you," I said automatically, my voice hoarse. "Thank you." The creature stepped back slightly, startled by my voice. Its eyes widened, and I could see surprise in its expression, surprise that I could speak, that I had thanked it. "I won't hurt you," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "I'm a ranger, forest ranger. People tied me here and left me. Can you help me with these ropes?" I had no idea if it could understand me, but something in those intelligent eyes suggested it grasped at least the tone, the desperation, the plea for help. The creature studied me for another long moment, then moved around behind the tree. I felt its hands on the ropes around my chest, felt it testing the knots, exploring how they were tied. The rope shifted, loosened slightly, and then, with a sudden sharp movement, the creature simply snapped the rope with its bare hands. The sound of the rope breaking was like a gunshot in the quiet forest. I felt the tension around my chest release, and I could breathe fully for the first time in hours. The creature came back around to the front and knelt down, an oddly human gesture, to examine the ropes around my wrists. Up close like this, kneeling, the creature's face was level with mine. I could see the intelligence in those eyes, the careful concentration as it worked at the knots. The rope around my wrists was tighter, more complex, but the creature was patient, working methodically. "You understand me, don't you?" I said softly. "At least some of it. You know I'm in trouble." The creature's eyes met mine briefly, and I could have sworn I saw acknowledgement there. Then it returned to the knots, and after another minute of careful work, my hands came free. I pulled my arms around to my front, wincing at the pain in my shoulders from being held in one position for so long. My wrists were raw and bleeding from where the rope had cut into them. The creature made a sound, that same concerned vocalization, and reached out to touch my injured wrist, examining it with surprising gentleness. "I'm okay," I said. "Or I will be." "Can you help with my legs?" The creature moved down to the ropes around my ankles, and, finding the knots too complex, simply broke those ropes as well with a sharp pull. I was free. I tried to stand, but my legs had gone numb from being bound for so long. I stumbled, would have fallen, but the creature caught me, one massive arm supporting my weight as easily as I might support a child. It held me upright until feeling returned to my legs, and I could stand on my own. "Thank you," I said again, looking up at the creature's face. "You saved my life. I don't know if you understand that, but you did. Thank you." The creature tilted its head, studying me with those intelligent eyes. Then it did something that nearly made my heart stop. It raised one hand to its chest, then extended it toward me. The gesture was unmistakable. "You're welcome." It understood, not just my words, but the concept behind them. This wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. This was an intelligent being that had assessed my situation, decided to help, and was now acknowledging my gratitude. I stood there in the clearing, face to face with a creature that shouldn't exist, trying to process what had just happened. The Bigfoot had freed me, had understood my gratitude, had communicated back. My training, my 16 years of experience in the forest, my entire understanding of wildlife, none of it had prepared me for this moment. The creature took a step back, giving me space, but didn't leave. It seemed as curious about me as I was about it. We stood there studying each other, and I noticed details I'd missed in my initial panic. The creature's hands, while massive, had very human-like proportions with opposable thumbs and fingernails rather than claws. The feet, partially visible beneath the long hair on its legs, were broad and flat, built for walking upright. This was a bipedal primate, something that walked the evolutionary line between apes and humans. "I need water," I said, more to myself than to the creature. My throat was painfully dry after hours with a gag in my mouth. "My canteen is back at my truck, down the trail." The creature's head turned at the word water, and it made a soft grunting sound. Then it moved to the edge of the clearing where the two men had left some of their gear in their haste to pack up. Among the scattered items was a plastic water bottle, half full, sitting next to a collapsed tent. The creature picked up the bottle with surprising delicacy, examined it for a moment as if understanding its purpose, then brought it to me. It held out the bottle, waiting for me to take it. I accepted it carefully, our fingers touching briefly. The creature's skin was warm, leathery, with thick calluses. "Thank you," I said, for what felt like the 100th time. I unscrewed the cap and drank deeply, the warm water tasting like the best thing I'd ever consumed. The creature watched me drink, then sat down on a fallen log with surprising casualness, as if we were two people taking a break during a hike. The gesture was so unexpectedly normal that I almost laughed. "I don't suppose you can tell me your name," I said, sitting down on a rock a few feet away. My legs were still shaky, and I needed to rest before attempting the 2-mile hike back to my truck. Or do your people have names? The creature regarded me with those intelligent eyes, but didn't respond. Of course not. I was being ridiculous expecting it to speak English. But the fact that it had chosen to sit, to stay with me rather than disappearing back into the forest, suggested it wanted something. Communication, maybe. Connection. My name is Richard, I said, pointing to myself. Richard Dalton. I'm a ranger. I protect this forest, help people who get lost or hurt. I gestured around us. This is my job. Those men who tied me up, they were breaking the rules, camping illegally. I was just trying to do my job, and I trailed off, the reality of what had happened finally hitting me. I'd been assaulted, left to die, or at least suffer serious harm, by 2 men who I'd simply tried to educate about forest regulations. If this creature hadn't found me, I might have been stuck there for 10, 12, maybe 15 hours until someone from the ranger station came looking. In this heat, without water, that could have been fatal. The creature must have sensed my distress because it made a soft sound, that same soothing vocalization from before. It stood up and moved closer, then did something extraordinary. It reached out and gently touched my shoulder, the same kind of comforting gesture one human might offer another. I looked up at its face, into those deep brown eyes, and saw compassion there. This creature understood suffering, understood fear, and was offering comfort in the only way it knew how. You're amazing, I said quietly. You know that? Everyone thinks your kind is just an animal, or that you don't exist at all. But you're so much more than that. I stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. What was this creature? Not human, but clearly possessing human-like intelligence and empathy. Not an animal, but something else entirely. A being that existed in the gap between what we understood and what we'd yet to discover. The creature sat back down, and we remained like that for perhaps 20 minutes, just sitting together in the clearing. I drank more water, assessed my injuries, bruised ribs where the ropes had been tightest, raw skin on my wrists and ankles, but nothing serious. The creature seemed content to simply be present, occasionally making soft vocalizations that I interpreted as checking on me. Eventually, I knew I had to move. The sun was past its peak now, probably around 3 p.m., but I still had a long hike ahead of me, and I needed to get back to my truck, drive to the ranger station, and report what had happened. Not the creature, of course. I'd learned enough about Bigfoot lore to know that reporting an encounter would make me a laughingstock. But I needed to report the assault, get those men caught before they hurt someone else. I have to go, I said, standing up slowly and testing my legs. They held, though I was stiff and sore. I need to get back to my truck, back to civilization. Thank you for everything you did. I owe you my life. The creature stood as well, and I realized with a start that it intended to follow me. When I took a step toward the trail, it moved in the same direction, maintaining a distance of about 10 feet, but clearly accompanying me. You're coming with me? I asked, surprised. I mean, that's fine, but you should know the trail goes past where other people might be. It might not be safe for you to be seen. The creature made a sound that I couldn't interpret, but continued walking when I did. We made our way through the forest together, an odd pair, a forest ranger in a dirty, sweat-stained uniform, and a 7.5-foot Bigfoot walking side by side down a hiking trail in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. The creature moved with remarkable silence despite its size, placing its feet carefully, avoiding branches that might snap. I found myself studying its movement, the way it navigated the terrain with practiced ease, occasionally using its long arms to push aside vegetation or steady itself on steep sections. We'd been walking for maybe 30 minutes when I heard voices ahead on the trail, hikers from the sound of it, coming up from the trailhead. I turned to warn the creature to tell it to hide, but it had already melted into the forest, disappearing into the thick undergrowth, so quickly and quietly that I wouldn't have believed something that large could move that way. Two hikers appeared around a bend, a couple in their 30s, wearing expensive outdoor gear and carrying new-looking backpacks. They smiled when they saw me. "Hey, Ranger," the man said. "Beautiful day for a hike, isn't it?" "Sure is," I replied, trying to sound normal despite the surreal experience I just had. "You folks doing okay? Got enough water? It's hot out here today." "We're good, thanks. Heading up to the lake for some fishing." "Have a great time. Be careful with any fires. Conditions are extremely dry right now." They continued past me up the trail, oblivious to the fact that a Bigfoot was hiding in the forest just yards away. When they were out of sight, I looked toward where the creature had disappeared, wondering if it was still there. A soft sound, that same vocalization I'd come to recognize, came from the trees. The creature was still there, still following, just staying hidden from other humans. "Coast is clear," I called softly. "They're gone." The creature emerged from the undergrowth and resumed walking alongside me, though it now stayed slightly farther back and was more alert, clearly understanding the need for caution around other people. We continued down the trail, and I found myself talking to it, narrating my thoughts the way I sometimes did when I was alone in the forest. Those men who tied me up, they had California plates on their truck. Probably came up here thinking they could camp illegally and no one would bother them. They've probably been here for weeks, maybe longer. By now they're long gone, probably already crossed back into Oregon or headed east. The sheriff will put out a bulletin, but honestly, the chances of catching them are pretty slim. The creature made a sound that seemed almost questioning. "Yeah, it's frustrating," I continued. "I do my job, try to protect the forest and help people follow the rules, and sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes people react badly. Usually it's just verbal abuse, people telling me to mind my own business or threatening to complain to my supervisor, but this was different. These guys were desperate, probably involved in something illegal beyond just camping violations." We walked in companionable silence for a while after that. The trail wound down through beautiful forest, past clearings filled with wildflowers, alongside streams where the sound of running water provided a peaceful soundtrack. It struck me how surreal this was. I was hiking through the wilderness with a Bigfoot, having a one-sided conversation like we were old friends. About half a mile from the trailhead, the creature suddenly stopped walking. I turned to look at it, and I could see tension in its posture that hadn't been there before. Its head was tilted slightly, listening to something I couldn't hear. "What is it?" I asked quietly. The creature made a low warning sound, then gestured with one massive hand toward the trail ahead, a clear signal for me to be quiet and cautious. It moved off the trail into the forest, and I followed instinctively, trusting its senses over my own. We crouched behind a thick stand of huckleberry bushes, and moments later I heard what the creature must have detected. Voices, multiple people, coming up the trail from the direction of the parking area. Through the vegetation, I could see them emerge into view, 4 people in sheriff's department uniforms moving purposefully up the trail. My heart leaped. They were looking for me. Susan at the ranger station must have gotten worried when I didn't check in and had called for backup. These were search and rescue personnel. I stood up, ready to call out to them, but the creature's hand, gentle but firm, pressed down on my shoulder, holding me in place. I looked at it, confused, and saw something in its expression that gave me pause. Fear, not for itself, but for what might happen if it was seen. I understood immediately. If I walked out of these woods with a Bigfoot beside me, everything would change. There would be questions, investigations, media attention. People would want to capture the creature, study it, prove its existence. The peaceful hidden life this being had managed to maintain would be destroyed. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, I understand. You need to go. Get out of here before they get any closer." Or the creature looked at me with those intelligent eyes, and I saw gratitude there, mixed with something else. Sadness, maybe, or regret that our brief connection had to end. "Thank you again," I said. meaning it with everything I had, for saving my life, for showing me that there's still mystery and wonder in this world. I won't tell anyone about you. I promise. The creature reached out and touched my face briefly, a gesture so tender and human-like that it brought tears to my eyes. Then it turned and moved into the forest, disappearing into the thick undergrowth with that same remarkable silence. Within seconds, it was as if it had never been there. I waited another minute, giving the creature time to get well away, then stepped out onto the trail just as the search party rounded a bend. "Here!" I called out, waving my arms. "I'm here!" The 4 deputies rushed forward, their faces showing relief and concern. The lead deputy, a woman in her 40s named Sandra Ortiz, who I knew from previous interactions with the sheriff's department, reached me first. "Richard, Jesus, we've been looking for you for hours. Susan radioed at 11 a.m. when you didn't check in. Are you okay? What happened?" I gave them the story, the abbreviated version. I'd found illegal campers, confronted them about violations, and they'd assaulted me, tied me to a tree, and fled. I described the men, the California plates on their truck, the approximate location where they'd left me. "How did you get free?" one of the other deputies asked, examining the rope burns on my wrists. "The ropes were old," I lied, hating the deception, but knowing it was necessary. After a few hours of working at them, they finally gave way. I've been hiking back down ever since. They accepted this explanation without question. Why wouldn't they? The truth, that a Bigfoot had freed me, was too impossible to consider. They gave me water, checked my injuries, and radioed down to the parking area that they'd found me. Then we all hiked back together, the deputies asking questions about the men who'd assaulted me, taking notes for their report. My Chevy Blazer was still parked where I'd left it that morning, though it felt like a lifetime ago. 2 more sheriff's vehicles were there, along with Susan from the ranger station in her pickup truck. She rushed over when she saw me. "Richard, thank God. When you didn't check in, I knew something was wrong. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "Shaken up, but fine. Those guys are long gone by now, though." "We'll put out an APB," Deputy Ortiz said. White male, approximately 6 feet, long hair and beard, traveling with a shorter male companion, both in their 30s, driving an '85 Toyota pickup with California plates. We'll get them. But I knew they probably wouldn't. Those men had hours of head start and could be anywhere by now. Part of me hoped they got away, not because I forgave what they'd done, but because their capture would mean investigations, questions, possibly a return to that clearing where the Bigfoot had found me. I wanted that place to remain undisturbed, to stay the creature's sanctuary. The paramedics, who'd arrived with the second sheriff's vehicle, insisted on examining me. They cleaned and bandaged my wrists and ankles, checked for signs of heat exhaustion and dehydration, and recommended I go to the hospital for observation. I refused. I just wanted to go home, shower, and process everything that had happened. Deputy Ortiz took my official statement, and I stuck to my story about the ropes eventually giving way. She looked skeptical. The ropes had been thick and well tied, based on the marks they'd left on my skin, but she didn't push. Maybe she figured I'd managed to find a sharp rock or broken glass to cut through them. Whatever she thought, she wrote down what I'd told her and said she'd be in touch if they had more questions. By 6 p.m., I was finally allowed to leave. Susan offered to drive me home, but I insisted I was fine to drive myself. The truth was, I needed time alone to think about what had happened, to try to make sense of an encounter that defied everything I thought I knew about the world. I drove home slowly, my hands still shaking slightly on the steering wheel. The radio was playing. I remember hearing Ace of Base's "All That She Wants," but I barely heard it. My mind was replaying every moment with the creature, the intelligence in its eyes, the gentleness of its touch, the way it had understood my gratitude and offered comfort. When I reached my cabin, it was nearly 7 p.m. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Mount Adams silhouetted against the colors. I sat on my porch for a long time, drinking water and watching the light fade, thinking about the creature somewhere out there in the vast wilderness. Over the next few days, I tried to return to normal life. I filed my official report with the Forest Service, carefully omitting any mention of the Bigfoot. I gave interviews to the local newspaper about the assault. They ran a story warning campers to follow regulations and report suspicious activity. The sheriff's department never found the two men who'd tied me up, but I couldn't stop thinking about the creature. I'd promised not to tell anyone about it, and I kept that promise. But I found myself researching Bigfoot sightings, reading accounts from other people who claimed to have encountered these beings. Most of the stories were obviously fabricated or the result of misidentification. But a few, just a few, had the ring of truth to them, describing creatures that showed intelligence, curiosity, even kindness. 2 weeks after my encounter, I took a day off and hiked back to the clearing where I'd been tied up. I told myself I was just checking to make sure the illegal campers hadn't returned, but really, I was hoping to see the creature again. The clearing was empty. The camping gear was gone, probably collected by the sheriff's department as evidence. The fire rings had been scattered. Nature was already reclaiming the space. I sat on the same fallen log where the creature had sat, and I waited for hours, but nothing appeared. As the afternoon wore on, I finally accepted that the creature wasn't coming back. It had taken a risk by revealing itself to me, by helping me, and it wouldn't take that risk again. As I was preparing to leave, I noticed something I'd missed before, a depression in the soft earth near the edge of the clearing. I walked over to examine it and felt my breath catch. It was a footprint, large, unmistakable, with 5 clear toe impressions. The creature had been here recently, maybe even watching me from the forest as I sat and waited. I knelt down and placed my hand next to the print for scale. My hand barely covered half the width. The print was at least 16 inches long and 7 inches wide, far too large to be human. I pulled out my personal camera, a small Kodak point-and-shoot I'd brought with me, and almost took a photograph. But then I remembered the creature's gesture of trust, the way it had freed me and asked for nothing in return except that I keep its existence secret. I put the camera away without taking the picture. Instead, I sat there next to the footprint for a long time, tracing its outline with my finger, marveling at the physical evidence of something extraordinary. Then I carefully obscured the print, brushing leaves and debris over it until it was no longer visible. Some things, I realized, were more important than proof. Some encounters were meant to be experienced privately, held as personal treasures rather than shared with the world. The creature had trusted me with its existence, had shown me compassion and intelligence that challenged everything science claimed about what was possible. The least I could do was protect that trust. Life continued, but I was changed. I returned to my duties as a ranger, patrolling the forest, helping visitors, monitoring wildlife. But now, every time I walked through the wilderness, I found myself looking for signs, unusual tracks, broken branches at heights too tall for humans, areas where the forest seemed strangely quiet. I never saw the creature again, but I felt its presence sometimes, a sense of being watched from the shadows that was oddly comforting rather than frightening. The 2 men who had assaulted me were never caught. The sheriff's department tracked the Toyota pickup to the Oregon border, where it was found abandoned in a rest area parking lot 2 days after the incident. The men had apparently switched vehicles and disappeared. Deputy Ortiz told me they were likely involved in drug manufacturing or distribution, which explained their extreme reaction to being confronted by a ranger. The case remained open, but went cold within a few months. My son Nathan visited that fall, spending a week with me during his school break in October. He was 15 then, at that age where he was trying to figure out who he was and what he believed. We went hiking together, and I found myself teaching him things my father had taught me: how to read animal tracks, how to move quietly through the forest, how to respect the wilderness and the creatures that lived there. On our last day together, we were sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Nathan asked, "Dad, do you believe in Bigfoot?" The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask? Some kids at school were talking about it. They said there have been sightings in Washington and Oregon, that maybe they're real. I said my dad works in the forest and would know if they existed. He looked at me with those teenage eyes that were simultaneously skeptical and hopeful. So do they? I thought carefully about my answer. I'd promised not to tell anyone about my encounter, but Nathan was my son. Still, I knew that telling him would put a burden on him. The burden of keeping a secret, of knowing something extraordinary that he couldn't share. I believe, I said carefully, that there are still mysteries in this world. The forests are vast, and we've only explored a tiny fraction of them. Could there be creatures living in the deep wilderness that we haven't discovered yet? Maybe. I think it's important to keep an open mind and to respect the possibility that we don't know everything. But have you ever seen anything weird out there? Anything you couldn't explain? I met his eyes and saw my younger self in them, curious, eager, wanting to believe in something larger than the mundane world. I've seen a lot of things in 16 years of working in these forests. Some of them I can explain, and some of them remind me that nature is full of surprises. That's what makes it beautiful. Nathan seemed satisfied with that answer, and we let the subject drop. But I think he knew on some level that I was keeping something from him. He was a perceptive kid. The years passed. The 1990s gave way to the 2000s, and technology began to change how people interacted with wilderness. Cell phones became common, then smartphones with cameras. GPS devices replaced compasses and maps. Trail cameras proliferated, automatically photographing anything that moved. The forest, once a place of genuine mystery, became increasingly documented and mapped. I worried about the creature and others like it. How could they possibly remain hidden in an era when everyone carried a camera in their pocket? When satellites could photograph every square foot of the planet? When drones could fly into the remotest areas? But somehow, they did. Bigfoot remained in the realm of legend, with blurry photos and questionable videos, but never the kind of concrete evidence that would force mainstream science to acknowledge their existence. Part of me wondered if there were others like me, people who'd encountered these beings and chosen to keep silent, to protect them rather than expose them. I retired from the Forest Service in 2008 at the age of 57, after 25 years of service. By then, Nathan was 30 and working as an environmental lawyer in Seattle, married with a daughter of his own. I'd become a grandfather, which felt surreal. But I didn't leave the forest. I stayed in my cabin, supplementing my pension with occasional guide work and nature photography. I spent my days hiking the trails I'd patrolled for decades, watching the seasons change, documenting the natural world with my camera. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd hike out to that clearing where I'd been tied to a tree in 1993. The forest had long since reclaimed it. You'd never know people had camped there illegally or that anything significant had happened there. But I would sit on the ground where that fallen log used to be before it rotted away, and I'd think about the creature that had saved my life. In 2015, when I was 64 years old, something remarkable happened. I was hiking a remote trail in the Indian Heaven wilderness, photographing autumn colors, when I found something that made my heart skip a beat. A gift. There, placed carefully on a flat rock beside the trail, was a collection of items: 3 perfect pine cones, arranged in a triangle, a handful of huckleberries that had been recently picked, and a single feather from a golden eagle, sacred to many Native American tribes and incredibly rare to find. The arrangement was deliberate, intentional, unmistakably placed there by hands, not random chance, and I knew with absolute certainty who had left it. I looked around, scanning the forest, and for just a moment I thought I saw movement in the thick timber about 50 yards away, a flash of reddish brown, too tall to be a bear, too massive to be a deer. Then it was gone. "Thank you," I said aloud to the empty forest. "Thank you for remembering me." I left the gift exactly where it was, taking only a photograph with my digital camera to remember it by. Then I hiked back to my cabin, feeling lighter than I had in years. The creature remembered me. After 22 years, it remembered. Over the next decade, I found other gifts, never in the same place, always unexpected. A perfectly round river stone placed on a stump near my cabin, a wreath of vine maple leaves woven together and hung from a branch beside a trail I frequently walked. An arrangement of mushrooms carefully collected and displayed. Each time I felt that same sense of connection, of ongoing communication with a being that existed beyond normal human experience. The creature was letting me know it was still there, still safe, still remembering the day we'd helped each other. I never saw it again face to face. Part of me longed for another encounter, another chance to sit together in companionable silence. But another part of me understood that what we had was better than that. A relationship built on mutual respect, on trust, on the understanding that some connections don't require constant contact to remain meaningful. Now I'm 72 years old. My hair is white, my knees ache on cold mornings, and my eyesight isn't what it used to be. Nathan and his family visit regularly, and my granddaughter Emma, now 18 and about to start college, shares my love of the wilderness. I've taught her everything I know about the forest, about respecting nature, about understanding that humans are guests in the wilderness rather than owners of it. Last week, Emma and I were hiking together near the area where I'd been tied to that tree 40 years ago. She was talking about her plans to study environmental science, about her desire to protect wild places for future generations. I listened with pride, knowing that at least part of that passion came from the time we'd spent together in the forest. We stopped to rest in a small clearing, and Emma wandered off a bit to photograph some wildflowers. While she was occupied, I noticed something at the base of a large cedar tree, a depression in the moss, shaped like a massive handprint. I knelt down to examine it, and my breath caught. The print was fresh, probably made within the last day or two. I placed my hand next to it for comparison, and the handprint dwarfed mine. "Grandpa, what are you looking at?" Emma called, walking back toward me. I quickly brushed some moss over the print, obscuring it. "Just some interesting fungi," I said, standing up. "Nothing special." But as we hiked back to my truck, I felt that familiar sense of being watched, not threatened, just observed. And I knew the creature was out there somewhere, still surviving in these mountains, still living its hidden life. That night, sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, I thought about writing down my story. I'd kept the secret for 40 years, and I wouldn't live forever. Should someone know what had happened? Should there be some record of that day when a Bigfoot freed me from certain death and showed me that intelligence and compassion existed beyond human boundaries? But then I thought about the gifts I'd found over the years, about the trust the creature had placed in me, about the implicit agreement we'd made. It had saved my life, and I would protect its existence. Some stories, I realized, aren't meant to be told. Some secrets are meant to be kept. The world is becoming smaller, more documented, more explained. But there are still mysteries out there, still beings that exist in the shadows, still magic in the deep forest. And maybe that's how it should be. I won't write this story down. I won't tell Nathan or Emma or anyone else what really happened that day in August 1993. The creature saved my life, and the least I can do is preserve its privacy, its safety, its right to exist without human interference. When I die, and that day is coming sooner rather than later, the secret will die with me. The creature will remain a mystery, a legend, a possibility rather than a proven fact. And perhaps that's the greatest gift I can give in return for the gift of my life. But sometimes, on quiet evenings like this one, I sit on my porch and I think about that day. I remember the intelligence in those dark eyes, the gentleness of those massive hands, the compassion of a being that had every reason to fear humans, but chose to help one anyway. And I smile, knowing that I was one of the lucky ones. I met something extraordinary, something that proved the world is stranger and more wonderful than we imagine. I was given a gift, not just my life, but the knowledge that we share this planet with beings that challenge our understanding of what's possible. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Mount Adams stands silhouetted against the colors, and the forest is settling into its evening rhythms. Somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness of the Cascade Mountains, a creature is settling in for the night as well. A creature that most people believe doesn't exist, but that I know is as real as the trees and the mountains and the sky. I raise my coffee cup in a silent toast to that creature, wherever it is. Thank you, old friend. Thank you for my life, for the gifts, for the reminder that some things are worth protecting even at the cost of never being believed. The world doesn't need to know about you, but I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express. That I do. That's enough. That has to be enough. And in the gathering darkness from somewhere deep in the forest, I hear a sound, a low, resonant vocalization that could be mistaken for wind through the trees or a distant owl. But I know what it really is. It's a goodbye, or maybe a you're welcome, or perhaps just an acknowledgement that we're both still here, both still keeping the faith, both still protecting the mystery. I smile and whisper into the night, "Goodbye, friend. Stay safe, stay hidden, stay free." And then the sound is gone, and there's only the night and the forest, and the secret I'll carry with me to my grave. Some promises are worth keeping, some mysteries are worth preserving, and some friendships, even the impossible ones, are meant to last forever, even if they exist only in memory, and in the quiet gifts left in the forest by hands that don't officially exist. That's my story, and it's the only time I'll ever tell it.